Hello, good afternoon, good evening. Before we get started with our further exploration of the Svabodha-mañjarī, the Blossoming of Awareness by Vīranātha, just wanted to take a moment to remind you or let you know that next week begins my new course on the chakras, Chakras Illuminated. And as far as we know, this is the only time this course will be offered. So you might want to check it out. It's being offered through Embodied Philosophy, and it's a 4-week total of 8-hour course exploring what chakras are and what they mean and how they work in pre-modern yoga, pre-20th century yoga, specifically tantric yoga. And just to address one quick thing about that, to whet your appetite for that course, is a lot of people, kind of debate with each other about what chakras actually are. And from the point of view of the pre-modern tradition, they're actually missing the point in making that debate, because chakras are not so much ontological realities, although there is an aspect of that, but rather they're kind of a cognitive map. They're a cognitive map of a variety of experiences and attainments that the yogi can have, that the yogi can experience. So, in fact, as we'll go over in the course, the chakras become a sort of template for mapping multiple elements of yogic experience across the energy body. So again, the chakras as a sort of cognitive map that enables the sort of assimilation and consideration, contemplation of these various states and experiences that the yogi can have. So we'll say much more about that in the course. It's just a little interesting tidbit on where we're going with that. So that begins May 8th. It's offered through Embodied Philosophy. There'll be a link in your comment section if you're interested in checking out that course. There's a lot of interest in it already, and we'd love to have you join us. Okay, so moving on. Now, in my video feed, things are all jerky. I'm hoping that for you guys, things aren't all jerky. I'm hoping that things look relatively normal to you, or whatever your version of normal is. So let's go on with the Blossoming of Awareness, the fuller title of which, Svabodha-mañjarī, means, again, a bouquet of methods for triggering the manifestation of your deepest nature, of your innate awareness, of your innate awakeness. Svabodha-mañjarī. Okay, great. So let's jump right into it. And we're on verse 24. And this is an interesting verse. And I'm sure people who are into running or jogging will enjoy the fact that Vīranātha, who doubtless himself enjoyed it because he put this verse in, says that through running, we can attain this state of consciousness. So let me just post it in the comments so you can see the verse yourself. Okay, so he says, Dhavata padavikshepa prayatnana vidharanat nisankalpa manovritte paramatma prakashate. Which means, if while running, one is not overly conscious of the effort of placing one's steps, then the activity of the mind, the manas vritti, the activity of the mind, will become nisankalpa, free of ideation, free of even intentionality. And paramatma prakashate, the supreme self, will shine forth. So, of course, this isn't so much a eulogization of running in particular, although perhaps it is that a bit, but rather an example of the fact that in tantric yoga, almost any daily life activity, when approached in this awareness cultivation context, can cause the Paramatma, the Supreme Self, to prakashate, to manifest fully, to shine forth. So this verse has to be seen in context, of course, of these other kind of verses of life, daily life activity, in which we can have this experience. So what is he talking about in a little bit more specific detail? Let's just hit on that he says, if while running, one is not overly conscious of the effort of placing one's steps. And I take that to mean one is not striving too hard. One is not trying to be the best runner ever. And that becomes a doership thing. That becomes a kind of mental activity. I'm going to be the best runner ever, you know? And he's saying specifically, no, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about not being conscious or overly kind of focused on the effort of where those steps are getting placed, you know. So in that context, then, there can be the activity of the mind can become ni-sankalpa, which could be translated to mean free of ideation, free of thought. It could just be as simple as free of thought or free of ideation, but also free of sankalpa, free of intentionality, because sankalpa can mean multiple things. So, you know, perhaps that means that even if you're running a race, you're no longer trying to win the race. You're no longer trying to be anybody. You're just surrendering into the flow. And I feel very little doubt, no doubt, in fact, that if Vīranātha had read Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, the great Czech-American psychologist who popularized the term flow in his famous book, that Vīranātha would have been right on. That's what we're talking about at least some of the time, right? Because we don't actually want to reduce the state that he's discussing in this text to a flow state. It's just that it can be accessed through a flow state, but it in and of itself is not a flow state. And that's important, okay? Because just briefly, if somebody is in the zone and then they expand their attention field to the whole environment, they almost always lose that flow state, okay? And here we're talking about a state in which you can expand your awareness to the total environment, the total context, and still be free of this sense of limited self or false self or mentally constructed self, right? So that's a longer conversation we can have another time. But he says quite rightly that if this mental activity becomes free of ideation and intentionality, becomes free, in other words, of the doer, then that which you really are naturally manifests itself, shines forth, prakashate. Beautiful teaching, and he'll repeat it in other ways, in other verses, in other contexts, okay? So let's do verse 25. So the verse 25 is very interesting. And now he's introducing a new topic, a little bit of a new topic. We're more than halfway through the text now, by the way. Okay, he says, Asane pyupavishtasya Kwame chittam avastitam vicharyaivam prayatnena niradhare prashamyate. Excuse me, prashamyati. Prashamyati. If one who is sitting on a seat, or perhaps sitting in an asana, reflects diligently, where is my mind located? Then that person There's no actual masculine gender in the verse. I'm going to correct the translation. So it's not he, but rather that person, abstract third person singular, will come to rest in the supportless, the Niradhara. And I'll explain what that means. Let's take it piece by piece. First he says, just sit down somewhere. Just sit on a seat, sit on a bench, sit on a stool, because asana can in fact mean anything from a stool to a throne. The original meaning of asana is a seat that you sit on. It can also mean a blanket you sit on, okay? Now, he could also mean sitting in an asana in the more modern sense of the term. It's less likely, but he could mean that. But at his time, if asana was used to mean yogic posture, such as padmasana or siddhasana, then it was always a seated yogic posture, because asana literally means seat. And only, the evidence shows that only in the late 1700s did asana come to mean any pose other than a seated pose. So here, certainly if he means pose, he means a seated pose. So he means sit down and investigate something. Now, I've translated, where is my mind located? And perhaps you guys can help me come up with a better translation, because chitta, it refers to the locus of both thoughts and emotions. So what he's really having us ask is, where are thoughts and emotions arising from? And where are they dissolving once again? Where is this sort of mental organ that I assume exists, that I believe exists, that generates thoughts and emotions? Where is it in my direct experience? Now, to ask this question, qua me chittam avastitam? To ask this question, where is the sort of source or locus of thoughts and emotions? You have to realize that in this tradition, they are differentiating chitta, mind or heart mind, from consciousness or awareness. Because if I ask you, where is your awareness? Then some people might say, oh, it's sort of in my head behind my eyes. And other people, perhaps who are a bit more observant, might say, oh, it's everywhere, it's all pervasive, because everything I perceive or am aware of is naturally permeated by my awareness. So they might say, yeah, awareness is all over the place. Here it is. But here we're talking about it's not so much, and it's not your focal point either, because maybe you're in an asana and you have what's called a drishti, a focal point, and you feel you're concentrating, sort of from here on your focal point. Oh, my mind, it's right here, but that's attention. So that's the faculty of attention. And what we're talking about here is chitta, okay? So that's the locus of thoughts and emotions. Where is that located? Well, you might feel an emotion somewhere in your body, but that's not consistent, is it? You don't always feel emotions in the same locus in your body. They could be anywhere, So when you go to find this mind, this chitta, this supposed organ that we've been told exists, when we go to look for it and find it in direct experience, we're a little bit stumped, aren't we? Where are thoughts arising from? In your direct experience, they seem to just arise out of nowhere. And you might have a conditioned sense that they're in your head, but, and I can cite an amazing academic book on this topic, other cultures actually experience thoughts in different parts of the body. So in pre-modern Indonesian culture, they experience thoughts and emotions occurring in the liver. And Indian culture, talks about experiencing them experientially, not just an idea that they're there, but experiencing thoughts and emotions in the heart region or the center of the torso. Other cultures in the spleen, and so on. There's a whole academic book about this, showing that in different cultures, thoughts were experienced in different parts of the body, and there's no consistency across cultures. So it's a culturally conditioned thing to experience your thoughts and emotions in different bodily centers. Okay, so that's perhaps a little bit unsettling to those who like to believe that there are these cross-cultural things that show something important about our psychic world. And I think that's true in some cases. But here, indeed, we find that cross-culturally, before the modern period when everyone influences everyone else, we find thoughts and emotions in different loci in different cultures. So then, in this way, having reflected diligently, he says, prayatnena, really try to find this mind, reflect on where this source of thoughts and emotions is. And you can't verify any one locus, can you? Any one adhara. So then what happens is when you realize that you can't find it, and it doesn't even exist in the way that you thought it did, as a kind of organ, as a kind of mental organ, then you become, or rather, he says, you come to rest, prashamyate, you come peacefully to rest. Sorry, prashamyati. You can sometimes encounter the verb in another form, but prashamyati, you come to rest peacefully in the niradhara, the supportless. What does that mean? The state in which you need no external support, where external is anything external to consciousness. The state in which you need nothing outside yourself. The state in which you are reposing, prashamyati, reposing in the ground of your being, and you need nothing else. This is a beautiful state that you can enter into in meditation, maybe for a few seconds, maybe for a few minutes, and then you can start to experience it in everyday life. Reposing in the ground of your being so completely that it feels like you need nothing outside yourself and you need nothing other than that which you are. This conscious presence, awareness, being. That's the niradhara state. The needing no sort of focal point and needing no support. Niradhara means both. Okay, so let's see if there's a question I can answer. I'm already running out of time. So Andra says, and I don't know if I'm saying your name right, if it's Andra or Andra, the quality of mind is grasped in dual reality as the relationship between object and subject. No, in this tradition we would say that mind appears to exist precisely because you believe in object and subject. You're conditioned to perceive in terms of object and subject, and because you believe you're perceiving an object, you construct a subject, that is to say the mind, in order to perceive that object. But there is actually no such thing, right? It's just a way of experiencing reality, but it's a contingent way. It's not necessarily the case, because as soon as you can dissolve the sense of there being separate objects, you can also dissolve the sense of there being a separate subject and vice versa, and you realize that the mind is a kind of imagined entity, that consciousness imagines an entity to create this false duality. Reinforced by language. I perceive a pot. I see a pot is the standard example in Sanskrit. So that gives you the idea that there is an I separate from seeing when there isn't. And that there's a pot separate from seeing when there isn't. Just look in your direct experience. So, yes, this is diligent self-inquiry. And I thought we were going to go do more verses, but we do need to at least touch on the very important Vijnana-bhairava parallel to this verse, and that is Vijnana-bhairava verse 82. Okay. I'm going to have to paste it in afterwards. I have it on the other machine. Here it is. Vijnana Bhairava Tantra, verse 82, which is undoubtedly the source or the inspiration for the verse we were just looking at. It says, situating oneself on a seat, asana, or a couch, sitting or lying down, doesn't matter. Imagine that your body is without support, niradhara, and is just sort of floating in space. When the mind dissolves into this contemplation, you become one who needs no external support. So, very close parallel here, more closer than usual. So you become, in a moment, you can become one whose ashaya, whose substratum has dissolved. In other words, one whose the substratum for one's personality construct dissolves. The mind is, as you knew it, is gone. And there's no basis anymore, in that moment anyway, for the person you think yourself to be. Okay? So it's very important to attain this dissolution of mind, this dissolution of ordinary, everyday, conditioned thinking mind that Vīranātha is talking about, because only experiencing that dissolution repeatedly can you see for yourself that the very basis, the very foundation or substratum for your sense of separate self doesn't actually exist in the way you think it does, right? It's just it's an imagined entity, an imagined thing which thinks the thoughts, right? There's nobody. Thoughts arise and feelings arise, and they're real, and we should never bypass our feelings, right? But this tradition is saying you don't need a thinker for thoughts. There's no person to own those thoughts and feelings. That's the imagination. You think, I'm so-and-so, I'm the one feeling this wonderful or horrible feeling. I'm the one having this, thinking this wonderful or horrible thought. But there's no one having those, owning those, and possessing those experiences except an imagined entity. Because thoughts and feelings arise spontaneously, whether or not you believe that there's a thinker of the thoughts or a feeler of the feelings. And you can verify this in your direct experience, as I have. And it seems like a very odd proposition until you verify it in your direct experience. So when you deconstruct the notion that you are the one thinking all the thoughts and having all the feelings, there's a sort of static entity there that produces these mental emotional states, then you start to access a kind of radical freedom, because none of what you think or feel is your fault in a certain way. Sure, you have a responsibility in terms of what you put into action and what you don't. That's a moral, ethical responsibility. But you're not to blame, and you're not to credit for anything you think or feel, because it arises spontaneously on the basis of conditioning, or on the basis of just simply the movements of Shakti, of consciousness energy. So this is a very beautiful and deep topic. And we'll just glance at verse 26, and we will then pick that verse up again next week. But I just want to give you a sense of where he's going here. He says, Vayuna spandanadini sharirasya karomyaham nacha chitte stito vayur na vayau chittam astitam. Through the prana vayus, I make the body spring into action, do whatever it does. And yet, this prana is not situated in the mind. It's not reducible to the mind. And nor does the mind reside in the prana. Ooh, So part of what he's saying there is prana is real, but we, again, imagine this doer who's responsible, or who's doing the actions, when in fact there's simply the natural flow of prana, which can be inhibited or allowed, as the case may be. Anyway, we got to wrap it up there, but we will come back to this next time. I want to mention, of course, as always, I want to mention the patrons on my Patreon page, whose generous support make it possible for me to offer free content to all of you, and that's going to be true on an ongoing basis now. And by the way, if you want to join the Patreon page, this Sunday we're going to do a really awesome webinar on the essence of Tantra by Abhinavagupta, chapter 4. We're starting a new chapter. It's a great time to join Patreon if you've been thinking about it before this Sunday, so you can be part of that webinar. And then once again, Tuesday, the Chakras course begins. Registration will close on Tuesday, so go ahead and get yourself signed up for a very interesting exploration. It'll be slightly geeky, just warning you, but I know some of you like geeky. Otherwise, you probably wouldn't be listening to me right now. So nice to be with all of you. Om. Thank you so much for your support.